click recording on this side, and then that should be going, fingers crossed. I did have a weird little Zoom pop-up warn me that things may not be recording, but I did actually specifically test this with my girlfriend calling in, so fingers crossed everything will be going fine. But I am joined here once again with Jesse McKinnell, back again within only a few weeks of your last appearance. It might be a month or so. Time is a mess post-COVID, so I've got no clue at all, but last time we had such a good chat, want to have you on again because there was a few little strands of things that I'm sure we could have whole conversations on, but one of them in particular was the end of the world. So why don't you start off by reminding people who you are and both of your lovely books, and then you can sort of define what you think the end of the world is, and we'll kind of go from there.
Thanks, Mike. And really appreciate you having me back on. It was really fun last time. I think it was about 6 weeks ago, at least, since we recorded it, and there's a lag between when you posted and recorded it. So I'm Jesse McKinnell. I am a writer based in the US, and I've published 2 novels. One, my newest one, it's a distinctly dystopian novel. That would be a good title for it, distinctly dystopian, the alliteration. But it's called Anarchy and Other Lies, and it investigates sort of like boring dystopia, is I think how we defined it last time, which is I don't think that the end of the world is going to be spectacular and caused by a meteor like what happened with the dinosaurs. I think it's a slow process, and we probably won't realize as we get there. And then I have another book called Dead Cats and the Reflections on Parenthood, which I published in 2018, and some more stuff coming out in the pipeline.
Which I'm sure you'll return back on the show to talk about those when they all occur in the future. So when you tell us, end of the world stuff, it's always a very intriguing conversation. But what do you define as the end of the world?
It's such a, there's so many points where you can, is it like the end of civilization? Is, especially if you're looking at it from, it's interesting with you being based in the UK and me being based in the US, because you can also look at it like dynastically, is it the end of an empire? Is that a point where you can point to and say, okay, now somebody else is in charge of governing the world, and because I'm a part of this empire, influence has waned, and effectively whatever. And I don't think that's it. But from apocalyptic standpoints, I think of the end of the world. I don't think you'll ever be able to eradicate humanity. I think that it's like we can't get rid of cockroaches. We'll never be able to get rid of all humans. So I don't think there'll ever be a point where the human life ceases to exist on this planet. So that's not how I think of the end of the world. I think of it more as a crumbling of society. And, something like when we look, dystopian is not a new type of, humans love dystopian entertainment, and we love to think about this stuff. And there's so many influences to draw from, and so many people have thought about what the end of the world looks like. And I think that the most realistic version I've seen for what I would look at and say, okay, that's the end of the world, is probably The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And I can't remember who was responsible for the movie. But that's sort of like scrounging for last available resources, ultimately lawlessness, and tribalism is I guess how I think is the best definition. And I think that movie was probably the most realistic portrayal of what it would look like.
Yeah, it reminds me, I've not read the book or seen the film The Road. I know the premise because a friend of mine, I think, read the book and told me quite a lot about it. So I think there's the father-son kind of relationship, that sort of thing. So I know the vague semblance, but there's a film called Book of Eli, and there's a game series called Fallout, and those things make me think something similar-ish. Is that right sort of lines?
Yeah, the Book of Eli, I saw that movie, and I was into it until the moment that Denzel Washington was looking for places to plug his iPod into. He needed the iPod jams to go out and kill marauders or something like that. It's been a while since I've seen that, but that's what I remember about that. And that was the part where I was like, I don't know, this is similar thing happened in Blade 3. Jessica Biel's character also needed to kill vampires to her iPod playlist, and I don't think that those things hold up very well. But yes, that's sort of, they always make it look like a desert. I think there's like never, you can't grow anything for whatever reason. You can't grow your own food, and particularly in the road, they did a great job of making the hunger palpable. Like you just really felt like the father and son were starving, and every good idea for like where to find food had already been taken. So I think that in that book they stumbled upon a bunker that had like Cheetos and some Chef Boyardee in it, and that was like the high point of the movie, was them finding some unopened cans of Chef Boyardee for the first time in a couple months.
Yeah, 'cause I think I'm in agreement with you. Like general, because there's end of the world, which is like the end of the entirety of the world, which would be a horrendous asteroidal impact. The sun, will eventually explode in some billion years, or like a massive solar flare will just singe and burn the entirety of Earth. Like basically, there's the end of the world where there's no life or next to no life, or then there's end of human world. And I think in this discussion, it's going to be more so about the end, or at least like huge amounts of population of the human race destroyed, modern civilization gone, probably no electricity or fleeting, lack of water, which obviously would then mean a lack of food. Those sorts of things, I think, we're both on the same sort of page of what would be considered, air quotes, end of the world. More so, end of the human world as we know it. So, I mean, we've got a few notes here that we spoke about before recording. And is there one in particular that you think is the most likely? Of the ones, well, either the ones that we've got written down, or if you thought of any since then, are there any that you personally think is the most likely one to occur?
That's a good question, and I don't know. And we talked about this last time a bit, where I told you that I think about this stuff a lot, and I definitely feel like I'm being too sensitive, and that if you look historically, the way things are going now aren't so bad compared to what at least America has been through in the past, and the tumult and the turmoil. There's something like polling says that like 50% of the people in America think that we're headed for another civil war. And but if you look at I brought up last time, like Vietnam, like the Cold War with Russia, where the school that I went to had fallout shelters in the basement, and I was like just removed from the generation where they had to practice like firebombing drills by putting their heads between their legs and hiding underneath their desks, and like the Cuban Missile Crisis and all this stuff. And to be alive during that time, you must have felt like the world was going to end. But I just can't help but and it's also probably like self-aggrandizement to think that you're so important that at some point you'll be the one who's alive to see the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's kind of egotistical to think that you'll have that sort of end of the life role, I guess. Or
well, that's what people with whenever zombies get brought up and people are, I wish there would be a zombie apocalypse. Like, no, you don't. It would be the worst existence ever. Everything you enjoy would be gone. It's basically just anything decent. It just goes back to the core human survival mixed with having to basically kill your whole family and friends and things. It's like, no, I don't think I'd last very long in a zombie apocalypse. I think I'd have one good idea, probably about weeks after someone else had a good idea, go there and get killed. I would like to think I could survive a zombie apocalypse and be the next Rick Grimes or something, but no, I think I would be pretty screwed. But sorry, continuing with your line of thought. So is there one that you think is more likely going to cause this, or?
So the one that's definitely the most likely is environmental degradation. And that's just because the other ones are sort of fantastical. Like I sent you a list of stuff like artificial intelligence, another pandemic, nuclear war, aliens. Aliens is such a wild card. Who knows what'll happen with aliens? And when I say that like humans will probably be on this planet forever, that's absent some sort of alien intervention, because I'm not going to speak to what they're capable of. But environmental degradation is the most tangible one anyway, where and this is definitely, I don't think that the environment will degrade to the point where life is unlivable, but I think environmental degradation will affect areas and make them so untenable that it will just create more war on this planet, which will, even if you're living in the first world or whatever, and you've got infrastructure in place that can deal with rising sea levels and increased temperatures, and you can shift where food production is coming from and shift where water supplies are and everything. I just think that some of the lower lying areas of the world, it's going to create so much conflict that the world is going to constantly be in conflict over resources in a way that it's never been before. And so and who knows what that triggers. So I think that's the one that I feel the most is the most real or the most pressing or prescient about what could happen in the future.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the other ones are more so like big events. There's one, if aliens came down, that would be a big event. If AI became, any of the number of things that people talk about with AI, if it becomes self-aware, if it connects to the internet, it becomes the most powerful, comprehending being where, like, in 1 second, it has the amount of time to process a thought. Like, if a human thinks for 1 second, you can think about, I don't know, a couple of words maybe. But whereas with an AI, if they became super intelligent and all this sort of stuff, the idea would be if you ask them a question, in the time it takes them to answer your question, which would be like 5 seconds, because of their processing power, it would be like 1,000 years for them to be able to think of that thought. And it's that kind of level of, we could have a whole conversation about AI, but like the AI becoming self-aware and then deciding to try and destroy the human race, or becoming a superpower and enslaving it, or whatever it would do. And that's something that's like an event. It would be a slightly slow, it'd be a progression, but it would kind of be this is when, Terminator is probably the best example. This is when Judgment Day happened. This is when Skynet became a thing. And then you got nuclear war. Well, when did the bombs, drop? So there's a lot of these things which are kind of something happens, it's the catalyst. Whereas I think with environmental degradation, it's basically, it's the more extreme side of climate change, and it's like a slow motion car crash. It's just like everyone who doesn't disagree it's happening generally can see it happening, but it's happening at such a small rate that so many people can try and turn a blind eye to it and just be like, oh, we'll let the next generations worry about that. It's like, we've been saying that for 3 generations now. This is actually becoming quite pressing. And it's just things like, certain crops that mess up soil, and then it takes a certain amount of years for the soil to be able to be used for other crops again. Then there's droughts that occur and water pollution and all kinds of things that in an isolated incident, a lot of people will just downplay their importance. But when you look at the whole map and you look at all kinds of things, even like I'm not vegan or vegetarian, I eat meat, but like I'm aware that meat consumption is a huge contributing factor to climate change. And then there's like if human race continues to grow, it's going to become an unsustainable enterprise. So people are looking at fake meats and stem cell burgers and insects and stuff like that. So there are a lot of, I like to think that with most of the end of the world stuff that's slow motion as opposed to an event, I hope that through the struggle eventually we'll come out the other side. But there's the pessimist in me and there's the optimist in me. And depending on what day you get me will depend on how hopeful I am about these things. So with the environmental degradation element of it, do you think it's going to happen and then it will screw the world over and human race will slowly go? Or are you more hopeful that if it did happen, we'd come out the other side? Like, what's your kind of thoughts on that element of an apocalypse?
I mean, that's a good one, because I guess that one's more about the empire building aspect of it, because there'll be something on the other side of it. It's just, who knows what it will look like. And will it be a free society, or will it be something else? And will it trigger something like nuclear war? Like if something happens with Russia, with the environment in Russia and China, they aren't able to adapt, and they decide to, actually, I touch on this in my book. That's one of my, there's an election going on in my book, Anarchy and Other Lies, and the one president is offering aid to Russia and China to help deal with climate change, and the other president isn't. And Russia and China are saying, well, if you elect the guy who isn't going to give us aid, we're going to fire nuclear bombs at you. So America, have fun at the polls tomorrow. And so I think a scenario like that is in play. It could trigger other things, but more likely it's just going to create a lot of conflict and a lot of change. And society as we know it will be markedly different because of it. The AI thing, I think is really interesting, because you've got the Terminator scenario, but you've also got the scenario where it's just better at everything than humanity. And we're already sort of getting pushed to, like, what do we do better than computers? Well, you can't replicate human creativity yet. Like, there's just something genuine about a human that's writing a novel or painting a picture or whatever is your artistic approach to it. And I think that's just a matter of time before AI also takes over creativity and it gets better, and it becomes, 1,000 monkeys typing on 1,000 keyboards, and they create the best novel that's ever been written. And it almost becomes, I thought about this, that it would, how, like, if you're shopping for furniture and someone's like, oh, this one's handmade, and you weigh extra to that, you're like, oh, this chair was handmade. That's there must be some like inherent quality in that, even though if a machine made one, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference, but because it's handmade, it has a special quality. And I was thinking that we're probably going to get there with artificial intelligence too, where you've got novels and books and screenplays that are written by computers, and then you've got another category that probably aren't even as good, but they're handmade by actual humans, and people go out and seek those especially. So then there's that part of artificial intelligence where it's not just the self-aware, but it's just like, what's the point of humans anymore? Like, what are we good at? What are we better at than the machines? And what do we do with ourselves all day? And if there's nothing to do, what's the point? What happens?
It's a bit like WALL-E. Have you seen the Disney movie WALL-E?
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah, exactly. Would be the fat guys going around on the carts,
not even know how to mate.
I don't know. Do you know much about artificial intelligence? I mean, I know probably more than average, but I don't understand. Like, I get the part where it's like a super efficient computer. Basically, it's just like artificial intelligence is just an algorithm that can process information at speeds faster than a human mind can, and can sort of then like take the next step and like see the questions that are popping up from its data analysis. But I don't understand who wants this.
That is a big why. It's it's the classic Jeff Goldblum line from Jurassic Park, isn't it? Like, you didn't ask how, what you should be asking why. Like, why did you want to do this? Right. We know we could do it, but do you want to actually bring dinosaurs back? I mean, I'll clarify, I think dinosaurs are pretty cool. So even though I know the potentially world-ending catastrophe that could happen, I'm up for bringing dinosaurs back. I think it'd be fun. So that's my controversial opinion of the time. But with superintelligence and AI, I've listened to a fair amount of podcasts on it, some by Sam Harris, some by Joe Rogan, so varying degrees of qualifications there, depending on who the guest is and normally how stoned or how many drugs Joe Rogan is on as to how weighted it could be. But aside from that, I've looked into it a degree. I probably would argue that I know a smidge more than the average person. I spoke to a guy called Magnus Unimer, who I think was Swedish, a couple of years ago on the podcast, and he was talking about like the Internet of Things, which is like washing machines that you put all the tablets in there at the start, and then when the tablets get low, they have access to your Amazon account, and they will, or your I shouldn't say Amazon account because Amazon are evil, but I still use them. But insert big corporation here who sells washing detergent online, and they will just order it for you, and it will arrive, and then all you have to do is put it in there and put the clothes in there, and it will just do that. And there's like fridges that do the same, where they monitor how much milk you've got, and then it'll order that. And it's like, that's one baseline of it, which is just making everything easier, which I understand, although I disagree with. I think anyone who's got a smart fridge is a bit of a dick. Sorry guys, if you've got a smart fridge, if you're gifted it, if you've got stupid amounts of money and you don't know how to spend it, give it to charity, do something good with it. But if you've been gifted a smart fridge, fair enough. If you've gone out and bought one specifically gets a smart fridge, I think you're a bit of a dick. Unless someone is listening, please contact me and explain to me what the benefit is, because I can't. Same with the washing machine. I'm like, do you really have so little time you can't think about ordering detergent? Like, of all the things in my life that take up time, washing dishes. Well, you've got dishwashers. Cool. That makes sense to me. That's a good shout. Self-cleaning ovens. Yeah, cleaning the oven's a bit of a ball ache. It can take a little while. I get that, even though I don't think they're perfect. But when it comes to things, all these other smart objects, I think there's a level of convenience, which I agree with. Like when the remote control got invented because people were sick of standing up and walking to their TV to change the channel. That's cool. But there are levels of it which just go too far. So I think there's the baseline of that level of intelligence, which I don't think necessarily is going to breach artificial intelligence of what we're speaking about. Because then there's, the computers that can beat humans at chess, which I think now is all the time. And there's some sort of Eastern game that's more complicated than chess or something. It's like the most complicated board game ever. And now AI have managed to beat humans at it. But it is the thing that you say where at the moment, they're better at analysing stuff. They're better at processing things. When you've got a chessboard, there's only a finite amount of things one can do on a chessboard, Whereas if I'm playing against a computer, they couldn't go into the kitchen and get a fork and put that on the middle of the board. That's not a legal move, but if I'm playing with you and I'm sick of it, I could do loads of stupid things to mess with your game. A computer can't do that. It can't think outside the box. And I think the thing is that what's happening is that the Western world are arguing we need to make our AI because China or Russia are currently making AI, and we need to make AI before they do because our AI is going to be morally good and their AI is going to be morally evil, which, people who are only listening, I'm using air quotes because, that I'm not going to get into a debate about morality, but that with China, Russia, America, and even my country, the good old England, I think it's just... I hope it would be for the best. I want it to be for the best. And I maybe it's just my naivety, but I think if AI did come about, I think we would somehow have a handle. I don't think it would end the world. But I think part of it is trying to stop the air quotes bad guys from doing it while mixing with convenience, while some people just want to do something for the sake of it. Some people are passionate about, being one of the pioneers of AI. And it's an incredibly impressive feat, but... Yes. There's also that query of if you create AI, how do you know when something is self-aware? And then if you make a smart toaster, how do you know the smart toaster isn't self-aware? It can't communicate with you. It has no way of communicating. So how do you know this toaster isn't trapped in this horrible life of being a toaster? So there's all these crazy questions that come off it. If you talk shit to your toaster and it's got the smart thing and then AI takes over, is the AI going to come to your house like the robots or the AI Gestapo and go, you were really mean to that toaster, and it remembered all of it. So we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
So yeah, loads of random thoughts.
So a couple of things to touch on. One, I like the part that we'll get true AI. Back to your analogy about the chessboard. Well, true AI will be when the computer can flip the chessboard at you in frustration and just throw it across the room, and that's when we'll know that there's really no place for humanity anymore. When it is able to experience rage, it's like artificial emotions coming on top of artificial intelligence. And so far as I can surmise, the race to AI seems to be, yes, like you said, sort of like a nuclear arms Cold War, and also an ego thing amongst extremely rich people who have that if you build it, they will come mentality to, we'll just do it and find a way to monetize it later because of course it must be monetizable. And if we do it first and it sounds super swanky, then we'll hold all sorts of intellectual property patents, and the morality of what we're doing doesn't matter because we're not even going to think about that. We'll just know that whatever we do, because we're the ones that did it, it will be okay, and therefore it's self-justifying. So that's the only way I've been able to wrap my mind around some of this stuff. There's a great short story that got some traction, I think, a couple of years ago about this future where everything was Internet of Things, and this guy was trapped in a hell where he couldn't put off-brand dishes in his dishwasher because it would scan them and reject them, and it was forcing brand conformity throughout his whole life. So you couldn't put off-brand milk in your smart fridge; it wouldn't unlock for you and stuff like that. And you can definitely, with the way that the incompatibility with some of these companies and the way they lock up their tech, you can totally see how we're going to get to a place like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many layers of AI that intrigue me, but I think one of the things is to be honest with everyone, I just think that I don't worry about it because it's not in my face. I think that's climate change isn't as in my face, but even I've noticed in my lifetime, which is I'm nearly 30, just living in the UK, I have noticed differences in the climate since 10, 15 years ago. Like, I think that's, in America, I know it's much more of a political issue. I know that, like, the right, generally speaking, doesn't even, well, for a while they were saying it's not happening. And then I think they've now changed it to it is happening, but it's nothing to do with humans. Which, to quote my dad, my late father, he said, even if you don't think climate change is being caused by the fumes out of the cars, can anyone really argue that all those fumes and chemicals coming out of the back of your car is good? Like, is it really going to be good? Or is it honestly doing absolutely nothing? Probably not. Probably not doing nothing, is it? You know, so climate change over here is not that political, though, in the UK. Like, we've got two main parties, Labour and Conservative. Conservative on the right, Labour are more on the left, but they're both central-ish. But even the Conservatives, they're in power at the moment. They're going forward with climate change stuff. They're trying to make sure. So over here, it's not as much of a big deal. But yeah, it's I think with AI, it's something that apart from sci-fi films and sci-fi movies and things like that, you know, that sci-fi stuff I enjoy consuming content, that's where AI is. And for me, it just seems like, because I'm not at the forefront, you've got things like Siri or whatever, which I don't use, but that's like really, really low-tech AI. That's more adaptive intelligence as opposed to true artificial intelligence. And I just think that, I hope that AI, it'll have an off button or something, or that it will destroy the world so quickly I won't even really know. It will do something like in Avengers 2, and it'll be like, oh, I'm artificial intelligence. Oh, humans are all bad. Let's just wipe them all out. And then either it'll fail or it will succeed, and I probably won't even know. You know, that's maybe my thought on it.
You'll be harvested like in the Matrix. You'll be in one of those pods, and you'll be eating your steak and being like, I know this isn't steak, but it looks like steak and it tastes like steak, so I don't care. Thank you, AI, for giving me this steak. It's interesting. So I totally have noticed a change in the environment too, and so I surf, and the time that I need a wetsuit to surf shrinks. You know, like I was out surfing until the end of September without a wetsuit on this year, and when I first started surfing like 15 years ago, you know, mid-September I'd have to put a wetsuit on because just the couple degree temperature shift in the water made a big difference. But and the political, you're right. It's great to hear that it's not political in the UK, because that gives me hope that, you know, America's problems don't infect the rest of the world in terms of everything becomes this ridiculous, you know, political value fight. But it's shifted from on the right from it's a hoax. Climate change is a hoax. To okay, it's happening, but it's happened all the time. It's cyclical and it's natural, and it'll go back. To now the rationale to not do anything is, wow, we're just a drop in the bucket. Look at what China's doing. If you can't get China to change their behavior, then whatever we do is just going to hurt us economically, and then we'll be behind China, and being behind China is a nightmare. So just keep burning the coal and the oil, because who cares? It's so nihilistic.
Yeah, because there's people in the UK who don't believe it, or there's people in the UK who, I think in the UK it's more about apathy. I think it's less so like like conservatives in power. They're not like climate change is the most important thing at the forefront. It's more so like, okay, we've got all these things that are important to us, primarily money and businesses and stuff. But then on the side, it's like, well, there's these things that we have no political alignment on. They're not bipartisan issues. Like, it's not left or right. So we just think this will probably be better. You know, we've got the Green Party, who's like top priority saving the planet, whereas the Conservatives is like top priority, from what they kind of say, is small businesses and the economy and money. Oh, this little thing that doesn't fit into any camp. Oh, we'll just go forward with that because the general public want us to recycle. The general public want us to have, more breaks for people to be able to have electric cars and getting rid of diesel and all these sort of other things. So in that regard, it is good. So we spoke about AI a bit, and we've spoken about environmental degradation and climate change and things. So we've got a few others. So we touched on nuclear war. So I'm interested by that because obviously the Cold War is probably the most recent time where people thought, nuclear weapons have only been about this century. Well, we're in the 21st century. The last 100 years is even less than that. Is about how long we've had. It was, World War II-ish was around the time it kind of came to the forefront of everyone's minds. And so for quite a new technology, I've heard of quite a few instances, I think there's a book about it, of like near misses where like the nuclear weapons almost got launched from certain places and things, which could have caused the end of the world. Do you think that a nuclear war now is as possible as it was at the Cold War? Do you think that's something to be worried about in your opinion? Or do you think it's just one of those kind of in the background, it could happen, but let's hope it doesn't?
This is your scenario where you just hope that you don't realize the world ended.
You just go to sleep and you never wake up because a bomb's been dropped near you and you get vaporized. Maybe you wake up for a second. What's that light? And then you're gone.
Yeah. I don't know how long it takes. So like satellites are probably detected, and depending on where it was fired from, you'd have like an hour to know that the nuclear.
Well, there's phone notifications because there was that thing in Hawaii,
exactly.
Wasn't there, where there's that emergency text sent out to people in Hawaii saying something like there's a natural disaster and everyone was having a meltdown. Then like 10 minutes or an hour later, they're like, "Oh, don't worry, actually, that was a false alarm."
Yeah, that's exactly right. You get your phone to vibrate, and like end of the world destruction, hide in your basement or something. I don't know what it would say, but there'd be some sort of public notification. But I mean, the nuclear, the doomsday clock, with the Union of Concerned Scientists, I think I have that right, who's responsible for that, would tell us that we're as close to nuclear annihilation as we've ever been in history, and it's shocking how much power one person has over nuclear arsenals. Like whoever is president of the United States could just become. There's very few it seems like there's very few safeguards that are keeping one person in America or Russia or China or India, any of the nuclear superpowers from just arbitrarily deciding, you know what? Screw it. That was a bad conference. That guy humiliated me at whatever United Nations concert we had, and now I'm firing some nukes across. We'll see if they can catch them. And it's so telling to me that the answer to like the supposedly the safest way to avert nuclear war is by building nuclear bombs. Like that's the best solution we've come up with for any of this stuff is more. We don't want to have nuclear war, so what do we need to do? Build some more nukes. Duh. So yeah, I find it concerning, and I don't know what the likelihood of that is, but that's one's like the aliens, where it's just this like wild card that's hanging out, and that's also one that can be triggered by a million things. Like if we have another world war, is that going to be a nuclear world war this time? America is the only country that's ever actually dropped nukes on people before, and that was because they were dropping nukes on people that didn't have them. And so like the best deterrent is so you can see where the deterrent argument comes from. It's like we learned it's like, well, we probably would have nuked Japan if Japan had nukes. So I guess that's where the justification comes from, but it's still a flimsy one.
Yeah, that's so funny. It is one of those things. It's like, if you're a kid and you've got like a big stick or something, you will smack other kids. But if they've got a stick, you probably won't. You'll hit their stick. It will just be like, I probably don't want to be smacked by their stick. But if you're the only kid with a stick, you'll go around school smacking everyone until because the consequences is quite funny. And yeah, I think when the whole North Korea thing came to light of like how, depending on who you talk to, depends on how much of a threat people think North Korea actually is. I'm not an expert in that matter. I just try not to think about North Korea too much. I'm just hoping he's a bit balmy. He's kind of like a small dog, just kind of barking, being like, respect me. I've got nukes. It's like, yeah, but by the time I take you to reach over us, you'll just end the world. Do you really want to end the world? Do you hate us more than you love yourself? Probably not. That's quite a good thing with America, I think, is that as much as America likes to act like Billy Big Bollocks, they love, as a nation, America loves itself more than it hates anything else. It loves America more than it hates communism. It loves America more than it hates Putin. So it's just like, you're probably not going to send the first nuke knowing everyone else has got a nuke because you don't want to lose everything. Whereas I think other nations, maybe Russia somewhat, I feel like is more likely to drop nukes than America because Russia, at least from what I understand about Putin and things, is more so like, I think if Putin got to the end of his life and he's like, you know what, fuck all you guys, nuke you all, I feel like that's more likely than anyone in America being like, you know what, screw all my family, screw capitalism, screw everything, let's bomb everything. So I think that it's probably more likely another nation's going to do it, but once again, I don't think anyone is anyone who's high enough in power who also has control over everyone else, although there are lots of safeguards, I think that, yeah, that we've kind of got past the point. I don't think, I like to hope no one who has that kind of power is willing to die. You know what I mean? Like, I think even if nukes did get dropped, there would be a degree of people who'd survive due, the dregs, either people in like Alaska or people in really remote areas who aren't affected by the radiation or the actual vaporizing bombs. And then that's probably what would turn into the Road/Book of Eli situation.
Oh yeah, and so I live in Maine, which is like the upper easternmost part of America, and we're not near any like major metropolitan areas. So don't think I haven't thought about like what's the fallout radius from New York City? will it get us? But I just want to congratulate you, Mike, on your analysis of America in spite of the fact of what happened here between 2016 and 2020, and who had their finger on the nuclear trigger during that time. So I'm glad that you still have faith that, sure, vanity was a big part of it. That's true. And Make America Great Again was certainly a catchy slogan. But I don't know if that was really, I don't know if we really love ourselves as much as we hate other people. I think that seems to be bubbling up. Like some of the rhetoric that went back and forth between Trump and Kim Jong-un, it's like 2017, like it had me legitimately worried. And perhaps that's naive on my part, but I wasn't worried so much because I agree with you, like, North Korea, and if you get a true irrational actor like North Korea, where it's a dictator and they're nuclear power, and there's like literally no checks and balances, no accountability for how they use those things, it's a pure mission of like, if I launch this, I'm definitely signing my death warrant. And you have to hope that they realize that, and they're rational enough at that instant to get that. North Korea, just from a tech perspective, seems like, they're a threat to South Korea. But I was more concerned, and again, perhaps naively, and it bore out that it was naive of me to actually be concerned about this. But I was like, are we going to bomb North Korea? Like, it really seems like it's on the table that the U.S. is going to bomb North Korea, and maybe not with a nuclear bomb, but with something substantial, or invade them or something. Like the warmongering that was going on, and the rhetoric and the escalation of it back in 2017 was just, I hadn't experienced something like that before in my lifetime.
Yeah, I think we over here were worried somewhat as well. We were like, what's America going to do? America better not fucking drag us into some sort of war and kill us all just because Trump and Kim Jong-un are having some sort of, dick measuring competition, which is what it would seem like. And it was... but I think with North Korea, it was that kind of thing where they're in a position where it's like, okay, if we bomb them, we're signing South Korea's death warrant because they've got like bombs aimed at... whatever the capital city is of Seoul, I think it is, of South Korea. And then it was also China were basically like to America, look, if you bomb North Korea, we're going to have to back them up. Like, they're our bro, soz. China and America have got this weird cybersecurity Cold War thing going on, but I think both of them are quite self-important, even though both commit war crimes. I think China's probably worse in general, but once again, I'm not don't listen to everything I say. I'm not 100% accurate with all my political understandings, but I think that both China and America both want to be the big boy nation of the world, and I don't think either of them are willing to allow their nation to be destroyed to one-up the other one. So I think it's just, well, I hope, I'm kind of in the same... I did have worries. I don't think you are naive for having those worries, because genuinely there were times over here in the UK, in the press and to general society, where North Korea was being spoken about a lot, and a lot of it was, regardless of whether or not you like Trump, that's fine. I don't generally support him. I'm not that entrenched in American politics, but Trump was a dickhead. Like, that's how most of Britain viewed him. Like, what's that twat over there doing? Like, we got a twat ruling us right now, Boris Johnson, who's basically a mini Trump. But it's just like, what is that twat really going to try and potentially cause the end of the world? Do we think... I was always that kind of mindset. I was like, I don't think Trump has the balls to do it. Trump, to me, seems like the kind of guy who'd square up to someone and be all fun and game, I'll beat you up. And then once he gets hit in the face once, he would cry and back away. That's kind of how I viewed Trump a lot of the time, where he's just that douche. Just someone at a party and you're just like, oh, don't get him started, for fuck's sake. We don't want to have to kick him out of the party because trying to get him out of the party is more effort than just letting him have his moment. You know, that's kind of how we viewed it from over there. We're like, he's probably not going to be there very long, but let's just hope he doesn't do too much damage before he leaves. So that's kind of most of the UK, even people on the right. Like, there were some people in the UK who did genuinely vehemently support Trump, weirdly, but most of the UK, even people on the right, were just like, ugh. So
well, again, I appreciate your faith in America that you thought we were going to get him out quickly. I wasn't so sure, but I'm glad that it happened. And it was definitely like when he got kicked off Twitter, that there was such like a tangible sense of relief. Right? It's like, oh, to hear this guy, you didn't realize like how much tension the microphone he had. Like when you're threatening other countries through Twitter, you know, it's like, oh, like that's the sort of thing where I'm like, oh my God. Like,
such a weird sentence. Story.
Yeah, it's so, yeah, anyway. Nuclear war is another one. Yeah, I can't quantify if I feel like that will be the end. People smarter than me seem to think that will be the end of us. And we can only hope that, you know, we're living in a place that we don't have like birth defects or we don't get wiped out immediately, and somehow we learn to live around it.
Yeah. I think if you know, who knows what would happen if bombs got dropped. You know, hopefully it would just be the two main people for squabbling would blow each other up, and then the rest of the world would just have to kind of pick up the pieces in a sense. But
bring back duels.
Yeah. I do think it's one of those things, like with most of these end of the world things, I do think that they're worth thinking about. It's good to have safeguards in. There's still a couple more I want to talk about. It sounds like I'm wrapping things up. Not quite. But it's more so, I do worry about certain things. Like there is that part of me that, I think with me as an individual is I do worry about stuff in general, but I kind of end up filing them in my brain in a way to compartmentalize stuff. So like AI, if I talk about AI, it comes to light, and maybe for a day or so I'm like, AI could take over and destroy everyone, but I'm just like, I have no power at all on any of these things that could end the world. And so when I don't have power over something, unless it's something affecting me, like if my boss is being a dick to me, for example, you know, I want to clarify my boss at work at the moment is lovely, so I don't worry about those things. But like, if someone at your work's being a dick, or there's just someone who's in your vicinity negatively affecting you and you can't really do anything, that I can't compartmentalize because it's, you know, in front of me. When it's world-ending stuff, most of the time I can just be like, yeah, there could be nuclear war, but I can't do anything. Either it's going to happen and I'm going to have to then live potentially for a very short period of time in a world where bombs have got dropped or an AI has taken over, or I'm going to get wiped out so quickly I'm not ever going to have to live in that world, or it's not going to happen in my lifetime. So I'm kind of in that mindset with a lot of these things, whereas with climate change and with like pandemic, it's one of those things where climate change is actually affecting us right now. Whether or not it will be the end of the world, who knows, but it's still having an effect, so it's harder to avoid. And with the pandemic, like, you know, the last pandemic was the early 1900s with the Spanish flu, even though it didn't originate in Spain at all. It was nothing to do with the Spanish. But with that sort of the pandemic thing, I think is something that's unavoidable. You know, regardless of whether or not people have been hugely negatively affected in the COVID pandemic, or some people have thrived in it, which kudos to them. You know, everyone's been affected differently, but it's undeniable that everyone living over the last 2 years has been affected by it in some way. And I think that the pandemic is something which, if you'd have asked me 3 years ago, I'd be like, I'm not fussed about a pandemic. I understand in concept it could happen. But after this, I'm just like, all it takes is another strain of COVID, and I think there's a new one out, Omni strain or something. But all it takes is, it's not this simple because I'm no biochemist, but in theory, you get the lethality of like E. coli mixing with how contagious COVID is, and that'll make a super virus. Because, you know, things like E. coli, if I've got my diseases right, you know, you bleed from every orifice, it kills you, it's horrendous to have, but catching it off someone's quite difficult because you have to come into contact with their bodily fluid or feces. So controlling E. coli
with a B.
Right.
E. coli is different.
Oh, okay, there you go. I'm glad you know, because I'm just waffling. But like, you know, with the pandemic thing, it's now refreshed my worry of just like, if COVID mutates, if all these vaccines, like I'm not an anti-vaxxer, I want to clarify, but I'm understanding that with like the flu, for example, you need to get a flu shot like every year because the flu mutates and changes and it becomes resistant to things. If this could happen with COVID and it goes down the route of more lethal, that is a worry of mine. So with you with a pandemic, like how likely do you think that was a few years ago? And now what's your kind of view on that level if it could end the world?
Yeah. And actually it's Ebola, right? Ebola. Yeah. So I like, even as late as like February 2020, I was like, stock market's crashing. What a bunch of worry warts. That's not, China looks like, they've got all of their cities on lockdown. That's not going to come over here, and no big deal. So like that was totally off my radar. And now you see stuff like they instituted a bunch of travel bans because of the new variant, and that just seems like there's nothing you can do to stop this. This thing is going to, like last time it got like to the US through New York from Europe, basically. Like you can't, there's too many tendrils all across. You can't shut it down. If it wants to get there, it's going to get there. And I've been reading some stuff about how the melting of permafrost by climate change is like releasing all of these pathogens back into the atmosphere that haven't been around for tens of thousands of years, and like no humans have like immune systems capable of dealing with these things anymore, and they don't know like what else is underneath the other layers of permafrost that are going to start bubbling up. And you add that on to just like, I don't know if COVID was made in the lab. There are smart people that are not like partisan actors or partisan hacks who would argue both sides, I think, and are trying to follow the research to find out. And I don't think that even if it was created in the lab, I don't think that China released it on the world as some sort of test. If it was, I'm assuming it got out by some mistake.
I agree.
But that's what these countries, and you'd be stupid to think that every country with the resources isn't doing the exact same thing, creating these horrible viruses in a lab. America is definitely somewhere in the desert of the Midwest where we've got, a bunch of bunkers full of the most horrible things you've ever seen in your life held in vials. And so it's like, this one has definitely changed my perspective about that. And it does seem like, as horrible as COVID has been, it seems like we got lucky with it, doesn't it? Where it's like, oh, this one gives you a common cold, and if you're just unlucky or you've got other comorbidities, it can be pretty lethal to you. And so Ebola is a great one. Like what happens if the next one's like Ebola, and like you're bleeding out of your eyes, or like pieces of your nose is falling off or something like that, and that's being transmitted through the air. It's like, was this just a dry run for something worse that's coming down the line, or is this truly a once every 100 years occurrence? And my grandchildren will have to worry about it.
Yeah, there is the worry as well that I've had, which is because of COVID, because like some of my friends have had kids during COVID or just before and things, and there is a worry that this generation that are born throughout the lockdown pandemic are going to have a worse immune system, because where they've been locked down so much, the way your immune system gets better is by coming into contact with things that are either not harmful or that could be harmful, but are in such low doses that your body is able to fight them off. The analogy I've always heard, which I think is quite cool, so I'm going to share with the audience on the podcast, is like, you've got an army of people, and then you've got a whole army, and then 20 of the enemy charge your gate, and then you kill them all quite easily and quickly, and then you study all their stuff, and you go, oh, they've got this type of weapon, oh, they've got this type of weapon, oh, they do this in this formation, okay, we will plan so that if they attack again, we've got some sort of contingency. And that's kind of how a vaccine works, that's kind of how your immune system, in incredibly layman's and simplistic terms, works. The small amounts of it, they can kind of learn. They can't really learn because they're bacteria, but broad strokes. So my worry, though, is that because we've been locked in so much, like over the last 2 years, I've had more colds in this 2-year period than I've ever had, because I'm not going out and my immune system is suffering because of this. And my worry is that something might happen where something like E. coli or Ebola or anything like that comes out, and previously wasn't that contagious, because generally speaking, a rule of thumb with most diseases is that the more contagious it is, the less lethal it is, and vice versa. And the worry is that, if the super virus does come out, that's not that contagious, but is very lethal, but because everyone's immune system is shot from 2 years of being basically inside, that now the human race is weakened to then be receptive to another one. I don't think it's going to happen, but there is that worry it could.
Yeah, and definitely the biology gives you comfort about like a pandemic actually being the one that causes the end of the world. And I think this one's one of the more unlikely ones, because it's still Darwinianism, right? Where the disease doesn't do any good to kill the host, because if it kills the host, it doesn't replicate, it doesn't move on. So its natural tendency is to make the host as sick but functional as possible. Basically as functional as possible. It wants to operate like in the background, and if you don't even notice it, that's the best case scenario for it, because then you're more likely to pass it on to somebody else. So just from a nature perspective, that's true. How we're monkeying around with and changing this stuff and combining who knows what is sort of the wild card that's in there too. And I have a daughter who's 9, and she was out from school from March of 2020 until September 2020, and then from September until June of 2021 she was in 2 days a week. And especially when and now she's back full time, masked and all that stuff. But especially when they're young and you see it, like they're constantly sick. Like, so the kids that are born nowadays, like we had her in daycare. And so I don't know what it's like for kids that stay home all the time with a parent that can stay in the house. But once you put them in daycare, for 3 years, they're constantly sick. Especially during the winter. They're just germ factories, and it's just their bodies catching up with all of this stuff. And so I don't know if that's going to have a suppression quality on humanity as we go, but they do catch on pretty quick. I think that hopefully there's not we'll all sort of get our immune systems ramped back up and functioning once we're exposed to people again.
Yeah. And it's as you said, like even when, I know it's not the same disease because it's via fleas and ticks and things, but like the bubonic plague, that's probably the most famous plague in the entire world before COVID. And it was like that happened, it wiped out a huge percentage of Europe and all that other stuff. And I didn't even realize until recently how many people in Europe and England died from the bubonic plague. It's like a huge percentage. I think it was like, I might be talking at my arse here, but I'm sure it was like at least like 10, 20%. I think it was more than that. But you got to think like, yeah, it was a huge amount. Whereas COVID, although it's, there are a lot of people been affected, most people I know in the UK have had COVID, but I don't know anyone who's died. I know people who've died. It's primarily, as you said, people with pre-existing conditions or are super old or whatever. And obviously there are people who seemingly are healthy who have died. And I'm not trying to downplay the severity of that. But as you said, like, it's quite lucky that the amount of people who get COVID and are actually okay, or at least haven't died from it, compared to some of the previous plagues and things we've had. And like the modern technology, I mean, COVID's been shit for a lot of people. But if this had happened in the 50s, the world would be vastly different, because at least with the internet being such not just a resource, but it's for most people in the built up first worlds, even in many of the other nations across the world who aren't as affluent in certain ways, the internet is such a huge thing. Most households have some connection to the internet. So the majority of people, whether it's reduced in certain ways, have been able to function somewhat. But if you had this in the 50s, my God, it's even like TV and music and movies, all those things. There was nowhere near the amount there is now. You could lock me in a house for two years straight. I have no interaction with any humans, and it would suck socially, but I wouldn't run out of things to do. I've got so many books I could read, comics, movies to watch, TV series, and it's like, that's the silver lining, in my view, of the pandemic, trying to downplay the severity of this horrendous thing that's been plaguing humanity for 2 years. It's like, you got Netflix though, haven't you?
I don't know. It definitely, like, the internet facilitated us being able to lock down. And it also did it from the perspective of a like a public health perspective and a public information perspective and an information sharing perspective, where it's like these are the ways that, and I don't know what that was like in the 1950s. I picture, like jalopies and black and white and just a general lack of sophistication. So, and I don't really know how this happened back in the 1920s with the Spanish flu. I read a bit about it, and their like solution was they would open windows in schools and like stuff like that, and so it definitely, the scale of COVID feels huge. And I think that's because we're all so interconnected now that we can track, how many cases a day. Like in the Spanish flu, I'm sure that nobody had any idea like how many cases were in the country or their town, or let alone like another country, and how they were dealing with it and the ebbs and flows and the seasonality of it. And so I bet it was a lot easier to ignore back then and just be like, oh yeah, it's the colds this year are really bad. But with the amount of interconnectedness that we all have now, it just facilitated what I think is a completely different response than we've had before.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's one of those things where, the internet, it connects us more, but it also puts a magnification on certain things. It divides us in a lot of ways, but it also has us together. The internet is very telling of humans, because humans aren't net good or net bad. We're just capable of the most horrendous things conceivable, while also some of the most incredible things conceivable. It's such a wide berth, and I think the internet is a mirror of that. Obviously, we created it, and it is a thing that only really works with human interaction. It's not something that just kind of functions by itself. People have to touch it. But we're kind of coming to the end.
Artificial intelligence.
Well, there we go. That was a good link. There you go. Very nicely done. So we're coming to the end here, because if we start off on another tangent, we'll be talking forever, which would not be that bad, I would say, but I haven't had dinner yet, so that's part of the reason. But just sort of final thoughts on the sort of end of the world thing. Obviously, this has been somewhat of a pessimistic chat, but we've tried to kind of be like, well, balanced. I've tried to, keep it balanced in some ways, but these things still have to be discussed. People, from my view, have to be aware of some of these things happening, but I would also like to put the little caveat and say probably only one of these, if the world's is going to happen, or they're all going to happen at once and it won't really matter, But with you as an individual, at this moment of recording, do you think it is very likely that the human race, either in our lifetime or say in the next 100 years, is going to suffer through one of these world-ending events? Or are you more optimistic about it? What are your personal opinions on this? And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. So again, this goes to my own vanity, which I can't seem to escape from this. That I hope it doesn't. And my realistic part of my brain says like, nah, you'll get to old age and you should worry more about cancer than you should about, nuclear war or something like that. But I can't shake the feeling that, and this is that progress, quote unquote, here's my air quote that you can only see on the YouTube, is hurtling to us at such a breakneck speed now that it's just sort of an unsustainable track we're on. And so I definitely worry about it, and it does drive, and my thoughts on this makes its way into my writing. And so it sort of my worries manifest there, and then they also fester because then I'm constantly thinking about this stuff, and so that it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's a feedback loop that just keeps getting worse. And I agree with you about the feeling of helplessness, where it's, what can we really do? I think that's dangerous a bit with the environmental stuff, because I do think there's some personal accountability stuff that we can all do to sort of make the environment better, and if we collectively do that, we'll force corporations to change, and we'll force governments to take notice and stuff. So I'm not hopeless about that we'll be able to turn the tide there, but it's definitely something I think about, and I guess I'm cautiously optimistic, and that, like I have a kid, so that's a big part of it. And then, but I do find myself sometimes when I'm like putting money away into savings for retirement or whatever, I'm like, am I going to need that or that money? I really, is there going to be a 401k when I'm 65, or are we going to be like is commerce going to be trading canned goods and Twinkies or something? You know, like, is that what it should be? Should I be investing in Mace?
Just like you do see those people who've got like who invest lots of money and time in those like end of the world bunkers. And that's like the ultimate I told you so. Like you investing like thousands upon thousands of dollars in that. And if you are right and the world does end and you get a Book of Eli, the road sort of end of the world situation, and you're one of those bastards who spent your life getting one of those things, you would be like you as an individual, you as one, I would be this way. I would be such a dick to people. Every morning we wake up with my family. Oh, is it still the end of the world? Who could have seen that coming? And I'll just be like that, a dick. If you want to come to my shelter, if you want to come to my shelter, you have to listen to me tell you how fucking stupid you are and how smart and right I was for the last while. I want to clarify, I don't have a bunker. Even if I had the money to, I wouldn't do that. But I have thought, because we've got, I think 401k with you guys is the same as what we have, which is a pension, which is basically you retire and then the government gives you a certain amount of money every month. And it's like, I've had discussions with Megan, and I've been like, she's like, you need to put money in your pension. I'm like, but it takes 5% of my wage. I don't make that much anyway. I don't want to lose 5% to potentially, at the moment, the retirement age is like 65, I think, or 67. And it was like 60 when I was like 10 years ago. And it's bumping up, probably going to be like 70 or 80 by the time I even get there. And I'm like, most men in my family died of cancer before 70. Like, I'm not saying, I know that a lot of it is lifestyle and things, and I try and live healthily, but it's also, I could walk outside tomorrow and get hit by a bus or be in a horrible car crash or something. Like, there's all these things, and I'm like, am I going to make it to the age I can actually comfortably retire? Is that really going to happen? I hope it does. I hope I live to a ripe old age. But equally, I might get to 80 and be like, I'm fucking done. I'm going blind. I'm going deaf. Everything aches. Just leave me in the woods. Just wheel old grandpa out in the woods, say goodbyes, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
Which is a horrible, nice, depressing way almost to end this. But fear not, my friends. The podcast isn't going anywhere unless the world ends. So, keep on listening to Genuine Chit-Chat. So, Jesse, do you want to just quickly tell people, I'll put it in the links in the description, where people can find you, where they can, your amazing writings and things, and anything, final thoughts you want to add, and then I will end the call.
Well, my final thought is I apologize for just laughing at your family's cancer history.
It's okay. Laugh through the pain.
So, yeah, I guess if you're predisposed to that sort of humor, you can find me at jessemckinnell.com and read my books, because it's full of blackness that I try to make fun of. And that's the best place. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on Twitter a bit, but Twitter's a cesspool, so I don't really look at it very often. And I appreciate you having me on, Mike. It was really fun. Both times we did this was fun, and for indulging me in this conversation that I can't really have with anybody else.
Well, I'd need to connect you in 2022 with some of my other podcasting friends, because I'm sure a whole bunch of them would love to talk to you about all this sort of tomfoolery and other books and comics and stuff like that. I've got a nice little network, so this isn't another thing to any of my fabulous listeners. Reach out to me and or Jesse and see what we're up to in 2022, because I'm sure whether or not your next book's out 2022, or if you just want to have another end of the world natter or anything like that, just hit me up and we can organise something. I would be delightful to have you on the show again. So yeah, it's all good. I'll put the details in the show notes to your website. Obviously, guys, check out the other episode, which I'm sure in the intro and probably the outro, I've probably rambled on about it. So check that out if you haven't already. And check out Jesse's books. They're amazing. They're a lot of fun. They are genuinely funny. If you read even an excerpt from them, or the first chapter, because I think the first chapter's on your website, it's like, if you read any of them, you won't be able to put them down. They're a lot of fun. So go check them out and support Jesse and follow him on social media, all that sort of stuff. And tweet at him every single day, because he loves Twitter. That's his favourite thing. Tweet really horrible things at him on Twitter. That's his favourite. But yeah, thank you so much, Jesse, for coming on. It is always a delight to speak with you, and talking about the end of the world stuff is always fun. So yeah, well, just thank you for coming on, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
And that's where